All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining our second installment of Archbold Biological Station Staff Seminar Series. I'm Laura. I'll be your moderator for today. On the screen, you'll see some ground rules for the webinar. You're all muted, so you must use the chat and Q&A buttons to communicate. Archbold staff will answer as many questions as possible. Our speaker today is Archbold's Director of Education, Dustin Angell. You may know Dustin already if you've tuned in to our Discovery Classroom series on Tuesdays. Dustin is an environmental educator, conservation photographer, with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Alfred University. As the Director of Education, he builds community relationships and interprets ecological research for audiences of all ages. Dustin is the president of the League of Environmental Educators in Florida and the recipient of the 2015 Outstanding Educator Award from the Florida chapter of the Wildlife Society. Hi, Dustin.
Hey everybody, I am glad to be here with you today. When people ask me to explain Archbold, usually it's tough because you might only have 30 seconds or a minute, someone walking up to our learning center and asking about it. It's hard to put Archbold in a nutshell. We're going to take about 40 minutes to give you a look under the hood so you can see what are they doing down there at Archbold. If you've ever wondered, I know there's researchers, I know there's scientists down there, I don't really know what they're doing. I know there's volunteers, I know there's students, what's happening? That's what we're gonna look at today and talk about why it's important. After the end of that 40 minutes, we'll take time for questions, but you're welcome to be adding those questions to the Q&A button on Zoom throughout this whole talk. But we'll answer them at the end. We'll start with the basics. What is Archbold? Then give a little bit of perspective and context for the times we live in. What is science showing us about the pulse of our planet right now? Then dive into how Archbold sees its own research and what we do. Then we'll have those questions at the end. If you want to remember just a few simple facts about Archbold, here's where you start. We were founded in 1941 by Richard Archbold. Back then in 1941, there were 2 million people living in Florida. Today, there's 21 million people in Florida, and we have a lot of visitors too, right? Over 100 million visitors come to Florida every year. So the world, Florida has changed quite a bit in those 79 years. It's made the work at Archbold even more important. We are an independent nonprofit. Most field stations out there are connected to universities. We're independent, but we work with all kinds of partners, which you'll hear about later. And our staff size is about 45 people with 75 volunteers. So those volunteers are really important for us. We have 3 main sites that we own and operate: Archbold Biological Station, Archbold Reserve, and Buck Island Ranch. Those first 2 are about 5,000 acres each, and Buck Island Ranch is 10,500 acres. So that's a lot of land to be managing in our region of Florida. Since we're a nonprofit and we're mission related, we have a beautiful mission that hopefully everybody can get excited about, and that's to build and share the scientific knowledge needed to protect the life, lands, and waters of the heart of Florida and beyond. What that boils down to is 3 pillars: research, conservation, education. That's what Archbold is all about. Where we work, there's a lot going on this map here, so let me just dissect it a little bit and make some sense out of this. You can see in the middle there, it shows the whole picture of Florida. We are zooming in here to that shaded area in the middle. That is the headwaters of the Florida Everglades, 2.6 million acres. That is the area where the lands and waters are draining south into Lake Okeechobee, which is the mother of the Everglades. That's what we're zooming in on here. Now, if you look towards the bottom of the headwaters map there, you'll see maybe a dark orange or reddish color, couple of blocks. That's Archbold and the reserve and Buck Island Ranch. That same color, you'll see marks throughout this region. Those are off-site research spots. So our researchers are not just staying on our own properties. They're working on public lands and private lands throughout this whole region. You'll notice green areas as well. Those are different kinds of conservation lands. And same thing, some of them are private lands, some of them are nonprofit lands. The last part I want to draw your attention to is the strip. It's a lighter tan color going right down the middle of that map. That's the Lake Wales Ridge. It's an ancient sandy dune island that's in the middle of the state. A lot of what Archbold is known for is studying the Lake Wales Ridge, and I will talk about it today. But keep in mind that the ridge is that's not everything that Archbold studies. It's this whole region, this whole headwaters of the Everglades region. To give you some context for why what Archbold does is so important right now, I want to look at some big studies. The one on the left, nearly 3 billion birds gone since 1970, is a study that was spearheaded by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And what they were able to do is show that if you went out and counted every bird in North America in 1970, not just the species, but every single individual bird in North America in 1970, and then you did the same thing today, you'd have 3 billion birds less. That's a lot, right? They saw certain trends in there. One of the trends they saw was particularly that prairie birds are not doing so well. On that map that I just showed you, I was mentioning Buck Island Ranch, I was mentioning that whole big region. That is an important area for prairie birds, and I'll talk about one of them later in the show. But this does come back to Archbold because we're working on these same areas that this study is showing are really our problems. On the right, 1 million species at risk of extinction, UN report warns. That's a quarter of the species on our planet that are imperiled. That doesn't mean they're all going to go extinct. Oops, sorry. That doesn't mean they're all going to go extinct, but it does show us that these numbers are dropping. What I think is amazing about this is that right now, because of the technology and international collaboration, we have the tools to see these problems. We have the tools to see the health of the planet in this way, and we also have the same tools to use to solve these problems, and we can use our networks and our partnerships to do that. So we've got some bad news, but it's coming at the right time when we can try to solve these things. I mentioned Florida's population has gone up, up, up. On the left, you can see what it looks like today with development in red. All the buildings, our houses, our supermarkets, all that stuff in red. Here's a projection for 2060. We currently have around 1,000 people moving to Florida every day. 1,000 a day. And when we project out, this is what Florida might look like. If you're a conservation-minded person, this map on the right is a little scary. For Archbold, it's important that we think about scale, not just our own property, but the scale, a larger scale of our region in Florida. But that our other scale is time. We're thinking about 10 years, 20 years, 50 years in the future and multiple lifetimes. How do we make sure we can secure the areas that need to be protected now so that as development continues to come in, we've got those areas locked down and ready. Part of that is working on private lands with our partners and making sure there's prosperity in the rural areas so that they don't become new housing developments. If we look at the 21 most endangered ecosystems in the United States, and start ticking through these, taking a look at there, some of them will start to look familiar if you're a Florida person. At Archbold, we directly study several of these, the ones I have in red here. So we can see these are areas that really need field stations, that really need scientists out there studying them and working on plans to help them. Okay, now we're looking under the hood here. We have 8 strategic priorities, and these break down into 3 main categories here: overarching research areas, building the scientific knowledge of the problems that are going against biodiversity and ecosystem processes, and then engagement, sharing what we know, sharing what we learn with others. We're going to walk through each of these and look at examples from all of these priorities. We'll take the most time with these first 2, biodiversity and ecosystem processes, overarching research areas. Here's Catherine out there putting out a beetle trap that her and her colleague designed, a new type of beetle trap. So part of what we do is figuring out what is out there. How many species are out there? But it's not just that, it's also what do they do? How do they interact with each other? If you ask people what Archbold is most well known for, I think that these 2 species would be the ones that would just pop up on everybody's mind: Florida scrub jays and gopher tortoises. Partly that's because these are really charismatic, interesting looking animals. But the other reason is because we've been studying them for a long time. We started our research on both of these in the 1960s. Florida scrub jays are particularly interesting because 1, they're very intelligent, and 2, they have a tight social group. They live in family units. So when we're studying them, we're watching each family. They each have a territory. We map their territory. It's about 25 acres each. We find their nests. We put little bands on the scrub jays when they're just little hatchlings. You can see the band on that scrub jay's leg right there. That's like giving them a name, so we can watch them throughout their life. Every month we go out and do a census, keeping track of how these scrub jays are doing, but we also know how they're related to each other. We're on, I believe it's either 14 or 15 generations now. Started way back in 1969. It's pretty amazing. The gopher tortoise is wonderful too. You know, that's the only tortoise that we have in the Southeast. And you can see him there moving around and bobbing his head. And we've been studying them for a long time too. Sometimes we'll put motion cameras in front of their burrows to see who is visiting who, trying to get a sense of their social network. We do a lot of research with fire too, trying to understand their relationship with fire, their habitat needs, and those types of things. Mark Darup, in some circles, is a bit of a rock star. So I've gone to talks that he's given, and some people are like, they're traveling from all over to see him. He's the bug guy at Archbold, and he's been there since 1982. He's out there, you know, collecting insects in the field like we saw Catherine was doing earlier. But it's not just collecting insects. It's figuring out what's out there. It's discovering new species. But now we've been doing this for so long, and the technology has improved so much that we can take that data, decades and decades of watching insects visit flowers and having a biologist write it down. We can take all of that and put it together. That's what we're seeing on that scientific illustration on the right. Let me explain it a little bit here. All of the green dots are plant species. All of the other colors are different types of insect species. And these are flowers that those insects are visiting. The really big green dot, the biggest green dot there, that's a saw palmetto. Saw palmetto flowers have over 300 species of insects visit them. And what we can see here is this social network. It's a bit like Facebook for ecosystems. Those connections there are showing us that these species are all interconnected, right? And the bigger the dot, the more connected they are with more species. The Lake Wales Ridge I mentioned earlier, today it's a habitat island. It used to be a real island when the ocean was higher. It has a lot of endemism. Endemism means a species that exists there and nowhere else. Our ridge is about 116 miles long, about 8 miles wide. It takes up less than 1% of the land mass of Florida, and yet it has 30% of the federally protected species on it. 21 of the 70 federally protected plants are found on the Lake Wales Ridge. If you live in Highlands County, you're living in a very special place. We have the highest concentration of rare plants of any county in the whole southeastern United States. How do we know all of that? Because we've got people at Archbold and our colleagues out there going out and figuring this stuff out. Buck Island Ranch is about 8 miles from the Lake Wales Ridge, and it's located in the headwaters of the Everglades. Inside of that region, around 1 million acres of that is private cattle ranch land. Okay, now these are numbers just from our ranch, but take a look at this. When you picture agriculture or you picture the beef industry, you might not think of a big giant nature preserve. But Buck Island Ranch, even though it's a working ranch, is also acting like a nature preserve. Take a look at this. 444 plant species live at Buck Island Ranch. 171 bird species have been seen at the ranch. That's pretty impressive. On the left over here, we can see percentages. So we're going to think about all of Central Florida from the East Coast to the West Coast. All of those species, what percentage of them exists on Buck Island Ranch? Not exclusively on the ranch, but how many of them can you find on our ranch? Over half the birds in Central Florida you can find at Buck Island. 85% of the amphibians, 67% of the reptiles are on this ranch. The mammal box is blank there for a reason. When they were working on this report in 2013, there was some bat data that they weren't able to get. So right now that's blank. But you can see mammals, there are a lot of mammals on the ranch as well. The bigger point here is that private lands and ranches in particular are really important for conservation in Florida. And if you don't remember anything else from this talk today, that is a really great take-home message. Conservation in Florida, its future depends on prosperity in the rural lands. Because if these ranches are disappearing, which some of them are, most of them aren't going to get turned into some beautiful nature preserve, right? They're going to get turned into a more intensive form of agriculture or a new housing development. The Florida grasshopper sparrow is one of those grassland birds that's declining, that 3 billion bird project was talking about, right? This bird is a federally protected subspecies, and it lives exclusively in the headwaters of the Everglades, Archbold's research area, and it is critically endangered. In fact, if it wasn't for groups like Archbold and other partners going in and really trying to save this species right now, it may have already been extinct, or maybe in the next 10 years would go extinct. But we're working very hard with our colleagues on this. Here's a little Florida grasshopper sparrow. This sparrow was very lucky because Greg Thompson and his partners, they went out to this nest They first listened for the male who was calling for a female, and then they would go back again and again, and they found the nest. They put a fence around the nest to protect it from predators. They brought boiling water out to kill the fire ants that were near the nest. And I think this one too, it was going to flood out there. So they went out and they actually raised the nest just a few inches to protect those eggs. And so you can see we got this little fella here. Captive breeding, it has also been a big help in the last few years trying to bring the species back. Now, some of those species that we have are just staying in one spot, right? Florida scrub jays, they don't usually fly very far away from where they were born. Other species at Archbold are traveling long distances, and we can't forget about them either. So here's a Florida black bear, and I want to talk to you about M34. He was a Florida black bear from a few years ago. I don't think he's actually the one in the picture. But when we see this map on the left, this is the journey that M34 took. I know that's probably confusing to tell what's going on there, but I can help you out a little bit. The top of the map, that's where Orlando is. The bottom right is Lake Okeechobee. We see all those little yellow dots all in there, right? That's the path that this bear took. M34, he traveled over 500 miles in about 3 months. If you look towards the top, you can see he tried to pass I-4 up by Orlando twice. Wasn't able to do it. Can you imagine trying to walk across I-4? That would be pretty tough to do. There's a couple important lessons learned from this project. One is that there are corridors that bears are using to travel through the state. Lesson 2, those corridors are not perfect and they're under threat. Lesson 3 is that they are traveling through private land and public land, a mix of both. The Florida Wildlife Corridor is a nonprofit that got started because they were inspired by this work with bear M34. They've been around for a few years now and have done an incredible job bringing awareness to wildlife corridors in Florida, working with the state, working with all kinds of partners, and encouraging the state to build underpasses for wildlife to use so they can go under I-4. And this is happening. The state is putting in passes in different parts of the state. Panthers use them, bears use them, alligators use them. It works. On to ecosystem processes. These are the cycles of water, fire, carbon, and nutrients. We want to have an idea of what's happening with the biological communities, but we don't want to forget the non-living components of our ecosystems. And we want to understand them as cycles. Fire isn't just this destructive thing that comes in every once in a while. Fire in Florida is a natural cycle here. And every habitat in Florida has a different relationship with fire. Every species has a different relationship with fire. We've started doing prescribed burns at Archbold in 1976 or 77, one of those. And we've been studying fire since then. Prescribed fires or controlled burns are really important because fire is such a big part of Florida that if you remove fire, these habitats will change. And those endemic species, those rarer species, they are not going to do well once the habitat shifts because fire was removed. Florida is the lightning strike capital of North America, and that's why everything in this area is so adapted to fires. Let's think a little bit about water, how it flows, and some of the problems and challenges that come with that. This map on the left shows the way things worked naturally if you could get in a time machine and go back 150 years. That region, that headwater region I showed you earlier when I said this is where we work, that's what that top part of that map is showing, right? And historically, the water that would flow south to Lake Okeechobee and then would spill over and keep moving south, and that was the whole greater Everglades ecosystem. Starting in the late 1800s, this has been altered a little bit, well, actually a lot of it, by drainage projects. And they have worked, right? The drainage ditches and canals have kept flooding out for the most part, and now people and agriculture can thrive in that region, in that northern Everglades region, the headwaters part. But it has also come with some disservices as well, like issues with water quality. So one of the things Archbold is really interested in is thinking about that region and connecting those different problems together and connecting them with our partners. How can we solve these by working with private landowners as well as agencies and other nonprofits? Here's one project that I absolutely love, the Northern Everglades Payment for Ecosystem Services. This is run by the South Florida Water Management, but Archbold has a big part in actually carrying out the project. There are 19 or 20 ranches involved in this in the Headwaters region, and they're being paid to do a simple project comparatively to some other water management projects. You can see it right here in the picture. That little metal culvert has some wooden risers. It's slowing the flow of the water. At Buck Island Ranch, we measured ours. We're slowing the flow 20%. And each of these ranches are getting paid to slow the flow. That is to help clean this water of extra nutrients, as well as to help with the water quantity problem we have in Lake Okeechobee, where we don't want too much water in Lake Okeechobee. If we can slow the flow, we can keep the water levels managed a little bit better at Lake Okeechobee. Ecosystem services, what that means is it's thinking about the services land provides to us for free, right? Cleaning water, holding water, giving us clean air. Those are ecosystem services. This is such an exciting project because it's trying to give an economic incentive to those landowners. If they're not there, if those ranches become new housing developments, those kinds of things, we're going to lose a lot of ecosystem services and potential ecosystem services. Our next section here is building scientific knowledge, finding solutions to some of the greatest threats to those first two areas, biodiversity and natural cycles. So let's take a walk through some of these. I bet everybody knows what that is on the left, especially if you live in Florida. You've probably seen some feral pigs running around somewhere. In fact, if you Google this, you can see pictures of people's lawns that the feral hogs have dug up. They are one of many invasive species in Florida. Florida is the United States capital for invasive species. We have over 500 listed invasive species in Florida. So what is an invasive species? It's an exotic species that's not from Florida. It's come from somewhere else. That's a bad neighbor. Some exotic species are not bad neighbors. They're good neighbors, right? But some of these, once they come to Florida, and there's lots of different ways they get here, sometimes accidentally, sometimes not. These are species that are problematic. They are causing problems in one way or another. The hogs are rooting up the ground. It's not fun if that's your front yard, but it's also not good if that's a sensitive wetland area. They're also eating the food that we put out for our cattle. And we are worried about disease transmission from the hogs to our cattle. Oh man, I love these pictures. So here's Kevin. He is the burn boss. We we want to do land management in Archbold, but we also want to study land management. Actually, just like with the invasive species, we're not just doing these things, we are studying them as research projects too. So when Kevin is organizing fires, there's a lot of data that's collected as well. Sometimes our plant ecology program will go out and they'll put temperature gauges, they'll bury them right under the sand, and then he'll do the fire right over them, and they can see how hot it gets out there in the scrub at the same depths where some of those, some of the high roots, or even some of the things like a Florida sand skink just living a few inches under the sand. So we really want to understand the role of fire, and also for restoration. We have areas in Florida that are not in great shape, right? That if fire has been excluded from them for a long time. We have areas that we're restoring, and so we're bringing fire in there. We're also sometimes cutting trees down before bringing the fire in, so it's not as dangerous. And we're studying all of that and sharing it with our partners. Another type of land management is doing something for a specific species. So there's Greg Thompson there. He's up in a longleaf pine tree, and he's putting in a birdhouse for red cockaded woodpeckers, a federally protected species. There was a lot of logging of the pine forests in Florida. Actually, last Thursday at Joe's talk, he talked a bit about that with the sawmill that's on Archbold property. Today, the longleaf trees generally are not old enough to support the red cockaded woodpeckers. Once they get a certain age, say 100 years old or more, the inside will start to rot and get softer, and then the birds can pick it out and make a little home in there. So Greg's going up, putting in an artificial tree cavity, and those birds, they'll go right in and use it. So that's another type of land management. And of course, we're taking data on all of this. Buck Island Ranch is 10,500 acres. And we are trying to balance sustainability in three parts, right? Economic sustainability, this is a working cattle ranch, right? So economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and cultural sustainability, keeping these ranching families in this part of Florida going. We have to balance all three of those. If one of those drops out, then the other ones are going to crash as well. Part of the ranch looks like this, how you would expect, how you expect pastures to look, but there's also hundreds of wetlands, and there's forested areas as well. And we're managing all of those for those three parts of sustainability. This is a carbon eddy flux tower. Whenever I'm giving tours at the ranch where this is, we have 5 of these. I always say, so what does a carbon eddy flux tower do? And you get some guesses, but most people are like, what? And I say, well, it measures carbon eddy fluxes, of course. What that means is this is measuring greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and methane. It's measuring how much, and it's measuring whether it's being produced going up into the atmosphere or whether it's being taken in by the plants and returned to the soil. This is a really important project, right? We want to understand how agricultural systems in Florida fit into the big puzzle of climate change, of greenhouse gas emissions. We are looking both at the agricultural side, the part that humans are manipulating by having, putting a bunch of cows out there, as well as the natural cycles of water like seasonal wetlands, at both of their roles in greenhouse gas emissions and in those cycles, carbon cycles and methane cycles. The Phenocam network, I just think this is so cool. There's the Marchia climbing up there. That camera that's on the top of that pole is taking a picture of the field there. It's taking a picture of the same field every day. And that might seem kind of strange, but take a look at this map. It's not the only camera, right? This is a network all over North America. And once you have a camera in all of these places, you have all of these eyes on these different habitats, you get a pulse of how greening is happening throughout the year. This relates to climate change because now that we have all these eyes out there, we can watch changes over the coming years or coming decades as this project continues. We've been talking about research and some of the problems and challenges that are facing biodiversity and that are facing these natural cycles. But if we didn't share what we were doing with other people and we didn't practice what we preached with, on our own properties, then it just, nothing would happen. So let's take a look at the ways that we are engaging with the public and with other professionals. This is the part where I come in, right? I'm the director of education at Archbold Biological Station. A lot of the times what that means is field trips. These are fourth graders. We work with all of the elementary schools in our county, in Highlands County, but we also have other schools come in as too. We have high schoolers, college students, all kinds of groups can book tours at Archbold. If you are interested in checking out Archbold, coming down one day, come on down. That's the Francis Archbold Hufty Learning Center. It's a beautiful building with some educational displays inside. We also have nature trails out behind it. Our offices are open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, but you're actually welcome to come on the weekends too. Now, right now we are closed. We've been closed for about a month, but when this all opens back up again, we would love to see you. It's free to come down. It's free to come down, but we do have a donation box right when you sign in as you're coming in the building. We really appreciate $5 per person. Remember, we are a nonprofit. What's a typical day for me in my role? Well, it's all over the place. Sometimes it's field trips, summer camps, tours at the ranch. The one on the right is a YouTube video that we made for the public schools. So when those fourth graders come for field trips, it's not just a field trip, it's a whole program, and they have videos and classroom activities before they visit. In the top left, that's me very excited at my first National Environmental Education Conference a few years ago. We take what we learn at Archbold and we share it with others. So we take our educational programs and I share those with other educators from around the country. But the ultimate job of the education department is to share what Archbold does, to share what we know there. My job is to take this science, to take this conservation that Archbold does, and to translate it for children and for people of all ages. When I think of students, I'm usually working with school kids, right? But another important part of our education program are these young professionals, our research interns. These are professionals that already have four-year science degrees, but now they're coming in to get some real life experience as working biologists so they can start their careers. Typically, a research intern at Archbold stays for about 6 months, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. And they create their own research experiment and they present it to our staff at the end of their internship. In fact, we have some of these internship talks coming up. We're going to post them live on Zoom. When it comes to our media communications, we have an all of the above strategy. Newsletter, social media, blog, press release, newspaper articles. If you want to know what Archbold is up to, you can find out. Go to our website and sign up for that newsletter. We send it out every month. The newsletter is on the right side of the screen. We call it the newsletter for curious minds. If you actually live in Highlands County and you get the local newspaper, the Highlands News Sun, every Wednesday we publish a story in the Highlands News Sun about what is going on at Archbold. And of course, you know, Facebook, we're always posting on Facebook. Here's our blog. All of those articles on Wednesday, we put them all on the blog. You can get on this for some one-stop shopping, right? And look at, we're on year 3 now, I think, of articles about research, conservation, education from Archbold. Fantastic resource. Fostering stewardship. Part of this is us practicing what we preach. I mentioned that already. We're managing 20,000 acres, right? Not only are we researching how to manage them, but we got to do a good job of managing them as well. And I think we're doing a pretty good job. Look at how wonderful these places are. On the left there, that's a view you only see if you have prescribed fire out there. The beautiful Rosemary Bald area. We interact with lots of partners as well. Here's just 3 stories of fostering stewardship. On the left, this was last year, we had 100 attendees which included people from 20 agencies there for gopher tortoise management for a workshop. In the middle there, it's talking about our relationship with the Avon Park Air Force Range, which we've had for over 20 years. We're working with them to help protect, we help manage, well, I shouldn't say manage, we help with some of the endangered species on their property, but we're also a partner in getting the areas around them protected as a buffer. Sometimes people are surprised when I talk about this because they think, how could a military mission and a conservation mission mesh together? But it really is a fantastic pairing. Because think about it, if you're training your Air Force, you need a lot of space. Not just the space for your servicemen to practice, but you need buffer space around that. And all that buffer space is going to be conservation land. On the right there, you can see that we won the landscaping award from the Florida Native Plant Society. This was really great for us because we put a lot of work into this, turning our landscaping into a model of Florida landscaping. We have about 100 species of native Florida plants on our campus. National global engagement. This is the part that really impresses me. I'm definitely an Archbold fanboy myself. Here's Betsy Boughton. Dr. Betsy Boughton, she's out there doing some grassland plant ecology work as part of the Nutrient Network. Here's the Nutrient Network. This is international. You can see all the points all around the world. Imagine if you could have one experiment, but instead of doing it in one spot, you could do it at all of these spots. That is exactly what's happening. That is a much better picture than you can get at one place. Archbold researchers do work locally. It's rare that an Archbold researcher would be traveling to another place to actually do research, to conduct research there. We work locally, but through our partnerships, we can be part of these big research projects and networks. I'm going to show you a couple more here. GLEON, Global Lakes Ecological Observatory Network. We have a lake called Lake Annie on our property, which is one of the deeper lakes in Florida. It's about 70 feet deep. This buoy floats out there at the deepest part and takes all kinds of measurements in the water, temperature and other things. We've also taken cores going down to the bottom of the lake there and taking cores because we can actually read those cores each year. Pollen from different plant species lands on the lake and goes down to the bottom. And it's so deep that the water is not mixing down there. So we can read those layers. We have over 40,000 years of that pollen deposition that we can read. LTAR, the Long-Term Agro-Ecosystem Research Network. You'll notice us down there is the only spot in Florida that's part of this. This is a network that's led by the federal government, by the Department of Agriculture. We're really proud to be a part of this. If you start looking around that map, you're going to find places around the country working with all different types of agricultural systems. And we're really proud to bring in the Florida cattleman's perspective and experience into this network. Our planet, human population is going up, up, up. How do we balance having enough food and even needing more food than we currently have with environmental sustainability? Big, big questions. That is what LTAR is all about. There's a lot of partners out there that the researchers at Archbold are working with. Here is some of them. You take a look through that list, you're going to notice agencies. You'll also see colleges on there. You'll see nonprofits on there. We are proud that we are bridge builders working with a lot of different partners. We ourselves are an independent nonprofit, which gives us flexibility to do this. Big shout out goes out to all of these groups who are doing wonderful things. This is the last network I want to talk about, OBFS. Well, actually, this one's not just OBFS, but OBFS is the Organization of Biological Field Stations, which is included on this map, plus some extra ones too. Archbold is a field station, which means it's a piece of land set aside so students and scientists could go and study it long term, right? We, over the last 40 minutes, have looked at one field station and the incredible diversity of projects and issues and research areas that we're working on. There's a lot of news out there that's, you know, not so great, like those two projects I talked about in the beginning with the 3 billion birds and the 1 million species at risk. But I can tell you, for me, seeing a map like this, knowing there are hundreds and hundreds of other field stations out there, staffed with people like we have at Archbold, makes me feel a lot better about the future. With that, a couple final thoughts here. I hope you enjoyed yourself. That was fun for me to go through everything. I want to give a thank you to all of those people who came before. I have the wonderful job of sharing what they've accomplished. We have 79 years of research, conservation, and education at Archbold, which is a pretty incredible thing. Thank you all for signing on. We are going to move to the Q&A section here. I am going to stop sharing. And let's have, so we have Dr. Hillary Swain, our executive director, waving to you all there. She's going to help with this Q&A as well. Let's see, I'm going to pull up. We have, oh, some questions have already been answered. We have a few that are open here. Zeke asks, what if other birds go in the birdhouse? Oh, for the red-cockaded woodpecker. Gosh, that's a great question. You put those in, hoping that the bird you want will go in them. Sometimes a different bird goes in there. But the idea is you're giving options, right? You're giving those options there for the birds and hoping that they will use them. And the research shows that they do. So even if if a bluebird, you know, or something else goes in there, you know, it happens. They've got a little home. Hillary, why don't you take the next one here? How many scientists are at the station?
Okay, I'll take the next two because they kind of go together. So at the minute we have, you know, it's usually somewhere 45, 50 people who are actually working at Archbold. And then on top of that, we have our research interns. So there can be 15 of them as well. So the station can have 60 to 70 people who are actually working on site on our own staff at any one time. But on top of that, we have lots of visitors. So we'll have graduate students coming in from around the world, and we have visiting scientists. On any day, you might see 5 to 10 of them at the station, and you may see the same at the ranch. So if you asked how many scientists are Archbold, out of the 66 people, probably 35 to 40 are scientists or technical support, you know, doing IT or data management or so science or technical support. But you know, we're just like any other nonprofit business. We've got accountants and people who clean our buildings and people who work on our ranch. So we have a lot of operational staff as well. And one of the wonderful things about working here is it is a real community of people with everyone with very different responsibilities, but we're very dependent on all of them to meet our mission. So it's a really fun place to work. And sometimes I walk in and there's so many cars and interesting people visiting. It's just, how do you get on with a day's work? There's so many neat people to talk to.
I see a question about grasshopper sparrows. Are they as far north as the south end of Orlando? We don't know 100 years ago or earlier their full range. Today, their numbers are so low that they're restricted to, we know 4 properties where they're located. They need the Florida dry prairie habitat, and some of them have adapted for ranch lands as well, for improved pastures. The place that is a great public place you can go to is the Kissimmee Prairie State Park. But I can tell you, it is almost impossible to find one of these little sparrows. You've got to go out with the biologists because they hide and they're small. During the breeding season, the males will hop up higher on the grass and they'll call for females. But they're called grasshopper sparrows because they sound like grasshoppers. If you're not attuned to their call, you are not going to know. You're not going to notice it. So there's not any currently all the way up to Orlando. There's still a little south of there.
Historically, that habitat, the dry prairie, crept up to the south side of Orlando and down to Lake Okeechobee and off to the west. So it is one of the most endangered habitat types in the US, is Florida dry prairie.
Can some of the invasive species of plants coexist with the natives? Hillary.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
I'll give you the hard ones.
I think the word coexist might be so the definition of an invasive plant is generally it's taking over. So there may be a period when they're first getting established where there's some overlap with natives, and sometimes you have some non-native species that are sort of waiting in the wings that haven't become very invasive yet. We occasionally have plants that sort of sit in the wings for decades, you know, in people's gardens, and then, you know, circumstances just appear that they're able to move into natural habitats. Generally, the presumption is that there are there may be non-native plants that are coexisting with natives, but most invasive species, if it's habitat that's suitable for them, are actually out-competing the natives, if that helps.
Hillary, can you talk about the snail kites?
Oh, right. So Florida snail kite, a species that was in the really deep trouble. It's one of Florida's raptors, and it's an extraordinary species. It was very much associated with open freshwater marshlands. And historically, it used to feed exclusively on Florida apple snails. That was the native apple snail. And its numbers were plummeting. We were down to less than 100 individuals. And then we had new non-native species associated with the aquarium trade, also apple snails, but not from Florida. The island snail is one of them, and they got introduced. They escaped from the aquarium trade. They outcompete native snails, and they can tolerate much sort of wetlands that don't have such long hydro periods. In other words, they don't have to be wet the whole year round. So these non-native invasive apple snails have spread everywhere. You've probably seen them. Their eggs are small and look like bright pink bubble gum sort of globs of eggs attached to boats and attached to trees and attached to fence posts. You see them everywhere. At first, there was a deep concern that they were going to badly affect Florida apple snails, but the reality is that the apple snails have actually adapted to them. In fact, there's an extraordinary observation that the bill size of the Florida snail kite has increased since the introduction of these non-native snails. In other words, the birds have adapted to the slightly bigger snails. Just an extraordinary thing in a matter of a couple of decades. So our snail kites are now found in a much broader area, all the way up to Orlando, down to Okeechobee, and using a lot of seasonal wetlands and working lands like farms and ranches. So it's an interesting story where the Florida apple snail has declined. The native snails have increased, the snail kite has increased, but there are some, real deep questions about whether the non-native snails are actually damaging wetlands in some ways. And we have a project with the University of Florida looking at that at the minute. That wasn't a quick answer, sorry.
We have a couple of questions in the chat, Dustin, if you can see the chat, or I can read them for you.
I'm scrolling through. If you see a good one, Laura, why don't you let us know?
All right, well, we had one really good one from Lee earlier asking what time of year you do the prescribed burns.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, Hillary.
No, that you can do that one.
Well, it's really interesting because right now it's raining actually in Sebring, but we're in the dry season right now, right? The end of May or June is when all the pretty much daily rainstorms and lightning storms will come in. So the natural fire cycle is in that time where it's still a bit dry, but then the storms start coming in, so late spring and into summer. But we also have to be practical, right? So we actually do burn all year round in Archbold, though we have done research on what are the effects of burning at different times of the year. And it does change. The native plants, they tend to do better if you're burning in their historical, natural time, and exotic species tend to do better when you burn in the winter months. Hillary, anything you want to add to that?
I think it would be fair to say that that's true, but it's a bit of a generalization. If we look at the records, you can have fires caused by lightning in every month of the year in Florida. Yes. What we do know from tree ring data, particularly at Avon Park Air Force Station, is that probably the really big, large-scale fires were likely started when there were late spring, early summer fires. And I'm going to come out because there's a train about to go past my window, so bye.
But that's a whole can of worms that just got opened up. Burn bosses and fire ecologists, they talk a lot about that. When they all get together in a room, I've been there, those are big topics. What's the right time to burn? How often do you burn in a habitat? And it's an evolving science. And there's also the practical parts of just getting the burns when you can get to them too. Let's see if we've got any other questions. What time of the year to control burns? We did that one.
I'd like to ask the question, is there anything that all of the scientists do that is the same? So two of the things that all the scientists do at Archbold is they work in the same place. So that's an extraordinary co-location of lots of research in one place. It really means you can ask lots of those what are called interdisciplinary or multiple questions across multiple species or multiple processes. I think the other thing that all the scientists do that is the same is they do long-term field work. So we are most famous for our long-term studies. Lots of scientists, particularly if you're on grants and things, you get 2 or 3 years and then you have to move on to something else. Archbold is renowned for its studies that run over decades, and it's with those really deep studies that you see the unusual events, or you really track changes over time, or you attract in lots of different researchers as new technologies and new techniques come along. So I would say same place, long term would be something we all do the same.
I'm going to pull my my slides back up here, and we're going to close it out. Unless Laura, was there any other? I think we got to most of those. We got to most of those questions.
You did. We have a few more in the chat if you guys want to stick around just a little longer.
Okay, why don't we'll tell y'all what's happening next week, and then we'll try to finish off those last few questions. So let me pull up here. There we go. Laura, do you want to get this part?
Thanks. Okay, so anybody that's ready to go, we just want to give you the information for next week. We have Archbold's Discovery Classroom Tuesday at 3:30 p.m. That'll be with Dustin again. And we have our agroecology intern, Hannah Van Zant, presenting her intern seminar, Sugar Spice and Everything Nice, a comparison of pasture and sugarcane water and nutrient dynamics during the first year of planting. And that'll be next Thursday at 3:30 p.m.
And
you can
I'd
on
like
our website.
I'd like to add one extra talk that we thought we'd put in that hasn't gone up on the calendar yet.
Yes.
I think April the 22nd next week is Earth Day, the Wednesday, if I'm correct. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we're hoping to have a new video coming out from Archbold, which is going to be done by Into Nature Films. It's going to be The Colors of the Scrub. And that afternoon, we'll get it posted so you can all find out about it. That afternoon, a few of the senior staff, we don't know quite who yet, are going to be available, maybe to give their different perspectives and answer questions on the colors of the scrub as a special Earth Day celebration.
Thank you for adding that. That's going to be very exciting. We're excited to work on that.
Thank you, everybody. Hillary, I do see a couple, there's at least 2 questions on here about the highways, the proposed highways. Do you have any thoughts?
I did answer one of them earlier up on the chat. So the last question, I think I already answered, but the second question was, do we have a specific person working on it? And the answer is no. We don't really have a director of conservation. We have a lot of scientists who try and fill in and, informal conservation action. One of the key people here is Viv Slaughter, who does a lot of GIS, that's Geographic Information Systems. Think of it as computer mapping. But no, we don't have someone specifically available to tackle that. It's really a capacity challenge for us. We'd love to be able to do everything, and everybody wants us everywhere. It's just very hard to meet all of the demands. Trying our best, but we have been commenting on the roads. Yes.
Oh, Hillary, we have an interesting question about Native American practices. Are there Native American cultural practices that you seek to preserve with the tribes? We do work with them at our ranch. Those Seminoles are big time ranchers in Florida. And they also have been doing fire for a very long time as well.
Yeah.
Hillary?
Somehow I can't see the chat questions, but let's not worry about that. I would like to, our closest liaison with the tribe is that we work very closely on our cattle operations together and have done some joint marketing, and we have not worked with the tribe extensively on the Archbold property. If you had been here, we know in 1930 that there were tribe members that came through this area. We've tried to help a bit with archaeological digs. So there's a site down the road called the Blueberry site, where we've helped identify bones and remnants from ancient hearths going back for the Belglade people back to 8,000 years ago and older. So we've tried to help with the detective work, based on remnants in fire pits and hearths that are on that Blueberry site. But not so, and we've done a few studies with the tribe over the years, but not as much as we would like. We would welcome any interaction, welcome it.
I'm seeing a lot of thank yous, and we're signing off.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming. We appreciate you attending.
Yes, and if you didn't get your question answered today, you can always email us. We'll have a follow-up email coming out, and you can email us your question. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Bye.